good day, everybody. Today on the Blue Dragon podcast, I have the honor of introducing Ahilan Ponusami. It's a tough name for me to mention, but it's great to have you on, Ahilan. Let me introduce you
Thank you,
briefly.
Jetro. Nice to be
You,
here. Looking
you
forward to the session.
Wonderful. You are the author of the book Technology Operating Models for Cloud and Edge from Pact. I think it came out last year with the subtitle Create Your Purpose Built Distributed Operating Model for Public, Hybrid, Multi Cloud, and Edge. You are living in Melbourne, at least according to LinkedIn, in Australia. So, the wonderful, sunny country down under. And it's great to have you on. So, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Jetro. Just to highlight that I co-authored the book with my good friend Andreas Spanner. And yes, it's almost 6 months now. And I recently moved to Melbourne. And funny enough, it's actually cloudy and it's expected to rain in a few minutes. It's a winter here. But yeah, so far things are great. I lived in Singapore before moving here and in US for a long time. Glad to be here and talking to you about the book.
Wonderful. I also reached out to Andreas, and we're also going to do an episode with him. So we got the two perspectives of the two co-authors. But for those of us who don't know you yet, can you take a minute and describe your background and how you ended up writing a book on technology operating models?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, right? So I started just like any other techie in deep dive, hands-on development arena. So I used to be a Java developer, and then later I moved into backline support for key customers as part of a product team in North America. Then I worked on healthcare as a solution architect. Then I moved to pre-sales, and I actually led a team in North America for pre-sales for some time. Then yeah, around 2016 2017 I got very interested in this modern cloud native development ecosystem, agile development, developer velocity, operating model, everything that is new at that time. And that curiosity has led me into this approach of working more with developers, understanding how they are delivering faster and meaningful business outcomes that are able to differentiate enterprises against their competitors by being more innovative and being efficient at operations. And the journey is continuing ever since. And I moved across multiple continents, like we spoke before. I was in Europe for some time. I lived in North America for close to 16 years, Singapore for 3 years. Now I'm in Australia, and hopefully I get to move somewhere else before I retire.
Wonderful. Yeah, you also mentioned that you worked at Philips in Eindhoven, which is in the Netherlands close by. So you
Yes,
truly
yes.
are a globetrotter moving across the globe.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes by choice, sometimes by a force. But yeah, it's been a good journey so far.
Wonderful. So let's dive into some foundational concepts that you write in the book. I assume that everybody has read the book and there might be some new concepts. So, first of all, what is an operating model and why does it matter?
So actually, operating model, the way I simply look at it is, it's basically a set of principles that are put together by enterprises to operate anything, right? And when it comes to the IT, which is the core focus of what we are focusing in on our book, is a set of principles that helps you to build, operate, retire, and upgrade your IT ecosystem. So you can think of anything that relates to technology, be it at the infrastructure layer, networking, application platforms, applications, and also the future innovation. It could be your edge ecosystem, AI ecosystem, and God knows what comes next. At the foundation of it, you need set of principles, and you need set of automation. You need set of people who are going to manage the technology, the people, and the process associated with it. And collectively, we call that as an operating model. It is not only the principles, it starts with the principles, and then it moves on to the implementation, and then it moves on to the operations. So, combinedly from principles, implementation to operation to build and manage your IT ecosystem is what I call it as operating model.
Great, very clear. I love that. And then let's dive into then the next step of the operating model, which is a technology operating model for cloud and edge. So how do cloud and edge impact the technology operating model?
Yeah, I think we spoke about it before our recording as well at a high level. So if you really look at it, the IT ecosystem is evolving and it's evolving fast. Gone are those days where you put together a system and an operating model and you don't touch it for 10 years, right? So I used to be part of the generation in early 2000s. Wherever you go or whenever you meet an executive, there are two areas they actually proudly take you to. One thing is their data center, and second thing is the team that is managing it, right? And one of the things they always used to highlight is, you know what, we put together this particular application that is serving our business, and we have not upgraded it for 5 years, we have not touched it for 10 years. That used to be a proud factor in the early 2000s, right? Even though early 2000s look like it is very recent. But nowadays, you don't see any executives even taking it to the data center or talking about how long the system is being operated on. So the innovation when it comes to cloud ecosystem has taken the level of abstraction, the level of operations to a much more faster and much more innovative cycle. And that requires a different perspective when you build and operate an operating model. And then the simple distributed nature of the edge ecosystem adds additional complexity. You cannot have everything put together in a data center, locked in, and then hidden behind a black wall, have access control and secure ecosystem. That days are gone. Availability of cloud that is becoming innovative as we speak day in and day out. It requires a lot more automation, lot more velocity, and lot more focused approach in managing the ecosystem. And the sheer distributed nature of the edge ecosystem actually adds additional complexity. So that is what we are trying to cover in our book. Operating model, which is basically designing, implementing, and then adopting a set of principles on a diverse ecosystem, which is basically a hybrid cloud ecosystem that includes your data center, which you have been traditionally building and managing, the cloud ecosystem, which is evolving faster and you have to keep up with the innovation, and then the edge ecosystem that is distributed everywhere is what is the core foundation of our book.
Really nice. Yes, I like how you showed the perspective from the 2000s till now. And then, of course, yeah, you already mentioned some terms. We have the hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, on-premise, edge. So, in your experience, what is the most common IT landscape today for most organizations?
I think I come from a very hybrid ecosystem aligned perspective, and I have not seen any customer in the last 18 months who has locked in on a single cloud or a multi-cloud strategy. Even though some customers misrepresent their hybrid cloud ecosystem as multi-cloud ecosystem, in reality, I think hybrid cloud has become the standard deployment unit of choice. As I mentioned, either by choice or by force, be it a traditional financial institution or retail customers, there are set of rules and regulations that are put together which requires the data residency and the data storage and the data backup and recovery that needs to be inside their particular zone or particular country they operate in, along with certain capabilities and certain innovation that the cloud ecosystem provides. So if you want to manage both, so you want to be compliant with a lot of security and compliance requirements that you are forced to adapt, and by choice, if you want to be more innovative, automatically you are gravitated towards a hybrid cloud ecosystem. And when it comes to edge is hybrid by default. You cannot operate an edge environment either fully based on your on-premise deployment model or fully based on a cloud deployment model. If you want to be really relevant on an edge ecosystem, you are going to start with hybrid as the default choice. So, in my opinion, in my perspective, and what I am observing from our customers' point of view, hybrid is the default option. And even though they may represent it as multi cloud, what they mean is hybrid cloud at the end of the day.
Right, right. Yeah, because that makes sense because many organizations have a legacy on-premise footprint. They are transitioning or adding public cloud to it because of all the innovations. Then they want to bring them together with some connection, so then you got the hybrid setup. But are you saying, I didn't catch that in the beginning, are you saying that you haven't seen many organizations yet really doing multi-cloud, like two or more public cloud providers?
Yes, yes. So they did start with multi-cloud as a risk mitigation strategy, saying that, oh, if I don't want to get locked into one cloud provider, I want to have another cloud provider as my risk mitigation strategy. But being multi-cloud does not address all of your security, data residency requirements, or the distributed edge environments that you're going to operate on. So the next logical extension for customers who are on multi-cloud is to extend to hybrid cloud. So it doesn't matter where you start with. Either you are start with your traditional legacy on-premise environment, or you are a bit far along where you have a solid multi-cloud strategy. You are eventually going to end in a hybrid cloud world. That's how I see it.
Exactly. That's very interesting because yesterday on the previous episode, I was interviewing somebody who is an AI expert who does practical implementations in manufacturing industries, let's say, for AI and quality and security there. And he says that we're always plant an edge device next to the machine because it needs with AI inside so that it
Yeah,
has
yeah.
fast latency, low latency so I also see edge growing in industries. What is your perspective towards the future? Like, how will the landscape in IT evolve moving forward, you think?
Yeah, I think with AI, the landscape is evolving into a different dimension as well, right? Because you cannot get away with the traditional way of building and managing systems anymore. Thanks to generative AI in the last 18 months, every application now is thinking about the intelligent future, right? I'm talking about applications thinking for themselves, right? So imagine being a future where you have a conversational application becoming a standard deployment unit of choice. So you're going to have a lot more applications that are upgraded or modernized from their traditional activity based user interface to a conversational UI. So there is a big implementation or big modernization that could happen there. And most of these applications are going to be built on open source technologies deployed on top of a hybrid cloud ecosystem. Then, like you mentioned, there is going to be a lot more innovation and lot more intelligence pushed to the edge as well, closer to the devices. So the AI inferencing need not happen on a huge GPU farm on a cloud provider. It has to be flexible enough to be distributed on the cloud, on the edge, near your data center, and everywhere in between. So the activity and the amount of data and the amount of processing that is required both from customers outside in and from enterprises inside out is going through a transformational shift, right? I would say generational shift to accommodate the AI and the hype around it. It is still hype if you really look at it, but I think within the next 18 months you're going to see a lot more business capable, business enable B2C solutions coming out of AI.
Great,
And that is going
great.
to be completely on open source and hybrid cloud. That's how we see it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So then, coming back to your book, you describe in one of the chapters bimodal IT, and I remember
Yeah,
that term from Gartner, I believe, in the second half
yeah,
of the
yeah.
2010s. So what is it? And then your position is it has failed. Why has it failed, in your opinion?
So the simple nature of treating things at two different perspective, right? Oh, if you want to innovate faster, I'm going to put you in one bucket. If you want to operate with more structure and resiliency, I'm going to put you in a different bucket, which is basically the foundation of buy model, which is okay, treating two different IT landscapes with two different operating models so that I do not have to make them collaborate because they are not compatible with each other is a failed model. The reason for that is you cannot have an enterprise ecosystem where you can classify systems as okay, this system needs to be always available but slowly progressing, and this system needs to be highly available but can be volatile, function together and deliver a business outcome. So if you are looking at from the business outcome perspective into IT, the foundational aspect of treating applications differently and having two different operating models, two different teams managing it is first thing, it is very expensive and it is combative in nature. It's not going to produce you or make you more innovative or efficient in operations. And third thing is it is not going to make you even progress at all. It is going to lock you into the model forever. So for these three reasons, if you really look at it in the early 2010 2011 when the cloud is becoming more and more prominent, and during the mid 2010s around 2015-16 cloud native ecosystem agile development and all those things are taking prominence, the foundational aspect of bimodal IT is left behind. I do know there are certain customers who still treat their business value producing traditional applications separately, but they don't still follow, or they don't follow the complete bi-model nature of it, right? It still have to be part of the same IT ecosystem, follow as close as operating model as possible together, and they all treated together as a single team. So the simple fact that having two different teams focusing on two different ways of operating the IT systems, trying to deliver the same business value, is the fundamental reason why we believe why model IT has failed.
Because that raises a question. I was When I read it, I was actually contemplating on it, and I remember some customers that have a mainframe system still in place
Yeah,
for operational purposes, a big mainframe. They have a special team with let's
yeah,
say legacy technology,
yeah.
and then they're doing new IT projects in a very let's say 2 week delivery sprint.
Yeah,
Doesn't that already signify there are two different modes here, and so the
yeah.
bimodal makes sense?
So that's actually a great question. In fact, I met with a customer last week who has a very similar model for mainframe and non-mainframe ecosystem. The mainframe ecosystem follows a different budgeting, different operating model. However, those models have a common abstraction layer where they exchange the data, and that abstraction layer acts as a buffer to make sure they are catering to the innovation and the operational efficiency needs in between. Yes, there are certain special needs where you may want to treat a small pocket of your infrastructure or your ecosystem separately based on the age of the system, the complexity of the system, or the business value they provide, but they are not mutually exclusive, isolated in an air gapped environment. They are still part of the ecosystem. But in a traditional bimodal world, even though it does not preach to be completely isolated, the most of the organization try to implement it in a comparative manner where the two teams do not have to interact. They are completely operated independently with a different SLAs for how they operate. Those days are gone. Even though they may be operated differently, they are still collaborative, they are innovating together, and they are operated at the same level as much as possible.
Okay, got it. Yes, that makes sense. So then, of course, you also talk about the impact of 5G, 6G, IoT, edge. So if you are an IT decision maker and you're hearing all these terms and it has impact on your hardware and your operating model, what does all of this mean and what advice can you give for the IT decision maker?
I think the biggest takeaway for us when we wrote the book, I and Andreas had a lot of discussion about it, was the sheer volume of unknowns that is coming in front of us, and how to stay ahead by building an architecture and an operating model that is resilient, that is consistent, that is secure, and that is flexible to adopt any change is actually the foundation of it. So some of the terms we mentioned, IoT. IoT is taking actually your IT ecosystem, which is kind of could be locked into a data center with the physical security as well as networking security, now to a distributed ecosystem where you cannot just think about, okay, I am secured because I have data center access locked in by physical access security, as well as my networking is actually locked in because I have this three zonal architecture, my DMZ, my internal network, and my data network. Those days are gone. And then add additional complexities. Now edge is not just as near edge, now edge is going to be near edge, far edge devices, and then the amount of data that AI builds on top of it, who knows what is going to come next. So the reason why we are building this distributed operating model is to cater to that foundation, where do not assume that your data and systems are going to be built and operated in a certain way. It is about a fabric or a mesh where you're going to have your data and applications and the infrastructure and networking layer floating across to different parts of your ecosystem or the mesh to accommodate different application and business value or business outcomes that it needs to deliver. So if you have that foundational aspect in mind, where you are assuming that your environment is going to be hybrid in nature, it is going to be distributed across a plane or across a fabric. It has to be secured end to end. It has to be accommodative so that any compliance and security requirements which can be put in future can be easily accommodated. is actually the foundation on which we talk about all these different aspects. So do not assume technology ecosystem as a two-dimensional plane. It has n dimensions which you don't have any control over. So that building a fabric or a foundation that is flexible, resilient, secure, and extendable is the way to go.
So that then brings to the very practical decision. Like if you have an on-premise environment and you have a cloud environment, let's say an Azure environment, you connect it to two, so you got the hybrid setup. You have some IoT sensors as well. You may even have already a small edge device for some AI pre-processing and all of that. Then, of course, when you want to add another cloud, so really going multi, the question arises, what do we do with the governance,
Yeah.
risk management, like security issues? What do we do with compliance?
Yeah.
What do we do with the backup and all of that? Do you see it more like it should be centralized or decentralized, or do you see it more like one cloud primary, or take it outside of any cloud? How do you manage that? What's your advice there?
I would like to have an abstraction layer defined that is closer to the business value creation, which is basically as close as possible to the application tier and completely above all the infrastructure layer, data layer, and the networking layer. So, in your example, in that case, rather than you worrying about participating and leveraging all the capabilities when it comes to infrastructure, networking, and application platform that are provided by the individual cloud providers, you standardize on an application platform. Let's say I come from Red Hat. Red Hat OpenShift is a great example. So you standardize on Red Hat OpenShift as being your application platform across a hybrid cloud ecosystem. Then you don't really have to worry about the infrastructure networking as well as the data plane underneath it, because with that abstraction you will be able to fit in all the cloud providers, be it on premise, be it edge, or be it multi-cloud environment together. And when it comes to data plane, you will be able to leverage out of the box connectors and some of the cloud native development best practices to distribute or to accommodate as different data plane as possible, or data storage or data bases as possible into that fabric. So the way I look at it is, the higher your abstraction, the more flexible it is. Yes, it does require some upfront investment, upfront commitment, but it gives you that unlimited liberty to accommodate any changes that comes into that ecosystem down the line, be it either by choice or by force, for you to be able to build and operate something that is meaningful for the next decade. So I always call that as a next generation or next decade application platform. When you are thinking about building something, always think about 10 years from now. Don't worry about, or don't think about focusing only on delivering that business outcome one application at a time. Gone are those days. You need to think about what will happen if I want to operate this particular platform for the next decade from three perspectives. What are the new technologies I may have to support? What are the new requirements I have to support? What are the new business value I have to deliver? Am I going to be acquired, or I'm going to acquire other businesses? How am I going to accommodate and integrate those systems together? How am I making sure that I have a API layer so that I can exchange my data? There are so many different data points that we need to consider. So keeping the abstraction high enough and always thinking about all the requirements that you may have to support for the next decade will help you to address and build a platform that is flexible enough to accommodate all those changes underneath it.
I can imagine that as an IT decision maker with tight budgets, and you have to make a choice between will I invest more so that in the next decade we have more flexibility versus just investing less, but then still achieving my small or short term business goal, that
Yeah,
most will go for second option two. How
yeah.
do we address that?
I think it's a balancing act. So I see adoption of technologies happen in three phases, right? First thing is learning, then then learning, then proving, then adopting, right? So like you mentioned, it is very easy for me to adopt something that I'm very comfortable with. Oh, I know this, I'm going to work with this, I know this application, I have this 10 servers sitting in my data center, I'm going to use it. And I don't worry about what happens next year because I'm going to get a new budget next year. If I ask for 50% more, most likely I will get it, right? That's one type of operating. But if you're building something for the next decade, you have to go through the three phases, right? You have to first learn, you have to first understand what is happening, and then you have to prove, which is basically you're going to build some pilot projects to see whether what you thought and what you learn and observed is something that you can meaningfully achieve, then adopt. So balancing the act of what is the current requirements that you need to fulfill in the quarter without actually compromising your long term vision is very important. In the book, we talk about in chapter 6 how this fictitious company, Bison Insurance, went through the journey. So, we do an exercise with some of our customers on thinking about the end goals. To start at the end is that section where we talk about customers. Okay, let's think about what do you want to achieve in the next 3 years. Let us look at the outcome first, and once we define the outcome, we define the journey after. And as part of the journey for the next 3 years, we meet meaningful milestones on periodic basis so that you are not compromising your short term vision, and you are on the same time you are not compromising your long term vision as well. So how do you make sure you are fulfilling your short term goals by aligning yourself to this long term outcome that you want to achieve in the next 3 years, 5 years, or a decade, is actually the magic behind the scene. And that requires taking a step back, doing a lot of collective understanding, collective data gathering through a certain exercises that we recommend in the book could be a great place to start. So always don't go with the data that you have in hand. Take a step back and look at what else I do not know, and who can help us get that data, and how will I get that data from that particular stakeholder is the first step for you to be able to define this long journey where you can consistently meet your short term goals and also align with the long term outcomes that you are after.
Yes, clear. Well, in my experience, the CIO is usually the person who drives this strategic change.
Yeah,
But I don't know how it's in Australia, but here in Western Europe, the average tenure of a CIO is 3 years.
yeah.
So he has his 3 years objectives, and he can accomplish that. But then the next CIO may change and pivot, and so the long term, the tenure plan changes again, or
Yeah,
is not reached.
yeah.
How do you deal with something like that?
Yeah, so that's one of the reason why we want our customers to define their widely successful or a end state goal for the next 3 years. That is one way we accommodate it. But the industry has matured as well, right? Just to be relevant for 3 years now, you can't get away with making just short term decisions. Because when I used to work for Oracle, we used to release an Oracle patch every year, and the Oracle major release used to be there for 5 years, 6 years, sometimes supported for 10 years, right? So basically, what that means is if I make a decision to install Oracle database today, and if I am a CIO, I don't have to touch it, or I don't have to reevaluate the decision till my tenure is over. I might have changed 3 companies by then based on the 3 year tenure you told me. However, look at the ecosystem now. Kubernetes ecosystem is evolving at a quarterly basis now. There is kind of new releases every quarter. I think now it is delayed by 1 month, so it's actually a great victory. Now it's 3 releases per year. So if I make a decision on an application platform that runs on a hybrid cloud without taking into all these factors that we spoke about, and I deploy it even within the 3 year tenure as a CIO, I have to make multiple decisions along the way that is going to validate my decision on day one. So it is not only about being a CIO on validating my decision, but imagine the amount of negative impact it will have on the business. Who is my primary customer? If I don't take the time and understand what else I don't know, who has that information, how can I get that information, and how can I build towards that collective knowledge that I have gathered so that I am supporting my business to be successful in the next 3 years or 5 years or a decade. As a CIO, I'm not doing my job. And it will be evident, it will be exposed within the 6 month cycle, because by then, most of the components I built, I have to upgrade, I have to maintain, I may have to replace, and there will be a lot of questions asked on me. Why did I make the decision in the first place? What data or what information I gathered, and what decision criteria I set to make that decision? I think it's a very dangerous spot to be in. So the nature of the evaluation that we are seeing in the technology landscape, Plus, the way the business outcomes are delivered primarily through technology has changed or shifted the technology landscape so much where we cannot just operate like the way we used to operate 10 years or 15 years back anymore.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So then, coming back to the previous example of this fictional company that has on-premise and a hybrid setup with a public cloud, they want to activate a second cloud for, let's say, a no vendor lock-in. But then, of course, the security, the compliance, all of that. What you're also seeing is a trend from cloud providers such as Azure from Microsoft, is that they're having solutions which are multi-cloud and even hybrid
Yeah.
cloud compatible. So
Yeah.
they're an open ecosystem. But let's say the like Defender for Cloud, which does all the security checks, it can even do these checks on premise in a Google environment, AWS
Yeah.
environment. But of course, it runs in Azure. That's the key point there.
Yeah.
So is that something that is still a valuable or a real option on the table, or do you say no? It needs to be abstracted really outside all of these clouds.
Yeah, I think there are two ways I look at it, right? There's a healthy ecosystem collaboration and partnership that is happening across all the vendors where they are putting together solutions that are compatible with the competitor ecosystem. Like you mentioned, if you take the software supply chain now, they can be deployed in Azure, but can be delivered to any other cloud provider or a hybrid cloud, or vice versa, right? Which is great to see. However, as an enterprise, let me ask a question to the CIO or the CTO there, right? So if you have some of the core components that takes care of operating your hybrid cloud ecosystem, which is delivering the most business value, which I mean by that is if that goes down, you have a significant revenue impact right off the bat. You don't have to wait even for a week. Right away, you know that you are on the press, your customers are screaming. If that is the situation, even though the solution you have selected can be accommodative, can work with the competitor ecosystem, will you want to have it on your ecosystem on the hybrid cloud abstraction that I spoke about on top of the application platform, or will you adapt it from a single cloud provider? When you look at it that perspective, purely from a risk management perspective, I believe most of the enterprises and the executives would prefer to have it on top of the application platform so that they have the flexibility to deploy it anywhere. Today, if I want to deploy it in Azure, yes, I can deploy it in Azure. Tomorrow, I want to move it to AWS, I can move it. Day after tomorrow, I want to deploy it on my own data center, I can move it as well. So the freedom of moving that core components of the platform that are either delivering innovation or supporting innovation or taking care of security and compliance has to be flexible enough to deploy it everywhere. So that is how I look at it. There is no problem or no technical reason why you cannot adopt a cloud only solution that is compatible on different environments from hybrid cloud, edge to core to cloud. However, the simple nature that they are available only on one landing zone is a problem for me as an architect.
Can you elaborate a bit more? Like the problem with only on one landing zone
Yeah.
is an
So
issue.
if let's say I'm taking, let's say, a particular CI/CD solution, which is delivering my software delivery across the supply chain from one vendor, let's say for this example, GitLab, and suddenly for some reason if that environment is available or I immediately want to move it out to a different vendor due to certain security reason, compliance reason, or some contractual negotiation, I cannot do it immediately. However, if I have built that layer on top of this application platform fabric I mentioned, let's say on a Kubernetes ecosystem, I'm leveraging open source tools, or I'm buying a solution from Red Hat and deploying that as a trusted software supply chain environment. I have the flexibility to deploy it to Azure today. Tomorrow, if I want to move to AWS, I can. Day after tomorrow, I want to bring it to on-premise, I can as well. So that flexibility of not pinning to a particular landing zone and letting it float on the fabric is the important decision making criteria for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, it is all about investing then upfront for future flexibility
Yeah.
versus let's see it as a commodity and let's leave it at a primary cloud provider. And then if ever we want to change, then we'll have to make an investment.
Yeah.
So it's
And
really like look.
just to clarify on that, Jetro, as well. Now most of these flexible and open source driven tools are available as a managed offering for faster upstart as well. So investing time early on, which used to be the standard for future benefits, is not always true anymore. You also have the managed offerings providing the same architecture. So if you want to start fast, you can go to a particular cloud provider and say, I want to deploy this particular Red Hat technology, but I don't have the time to build it for 3 months. Boom, just check 4 check marks, you are up and running right away. Then you can extend it to the whole overall hybrid ecosystem to get the flexibility you want. So you now have that the benefit of both, right? So you're basically making your own cake and eating it too at this point. Yes, there are some certain decision making you may have to do upfront, whether this is the right fit for your environment, your future vision, and your business alignment. But once you make the decision, you can start as fast as possible by going with managed offering to start with, then extend it to your own fully managed offering where you can actually build and manage it yourself, or vice versa. So the flexibility is there for our customers.
Very interesting. That's a new nuance I didn't understood yet. So great, thanks for sharing that insight. So then, actually moving to the book itself, it came out last year in July, I believe.
Yeah.
So how is the book doing regarding sales and feedback?
Feedback has been outstanding, Jitro. I'm not following up on the sales, but I am actually bugging my friends. Every time meet my friends, first the question I ask is, "Did you read the book?" To an extent, some of them are hiding from me now, right? Just jokes apart. But feedback has been amazing, both personally as well as when we talk to executives, because I always refer to some of the decision making aspects that we are talking about back to the book, because I always say, okay, if you don't have time to read the entire book, at least read chapters 5, 6, and 7, because the first part of the chapter or the first part of the book is all about the history on how the ecosystem has evolved, how bimodal IT was supposed to be that single magic well, but it just fell apart. And then why we are now talking about the distributed operating model and how to achieve that. That's the first part of the book. But the second part of the book, the core chapters are 5, 6, and 7. I ask customers mostly to at least spend time on reading that, and if they don't have time, at least we give an overview on this is the approach we have, and that has been received very well. And yes, there are some customers who do believe that it will take a lot more time for them to even get to the maturity on adopting some of those practices or guidelines we are putting together. But the beauty of it is there is no single fixed starting point that we recommend as part of the journey. You don't have to be an expert to think about how you want to build and operate your IT ecosystem for years to come. It is all about having a clear vision and starting where you are by trying to collect as much knowledge as possible, create an inclusive ecosystem where everybody's opinion is heard, and define a target state, which is where you define how success looks like or what success looks like in a time horizon, and starting from there. Those concepts are very fundamental and very foundational, and with our opinionated approach on how to run those workshops to get there, I think a lot of people are excited about it, and we are hearing good feedback so far. And we have at least to put it in a different way, I have not met any executives or anyone who has read the book who has said that this is not going to work for me because I don't even know where to start or how to start. We have, I think, made it very simple, very easy to follow, and with lot of references on how, why, and what. I put how first because we always talk about how we are going to do that, and then why we are doing it before what we are doing as part of that chapter 6 and 7, if you will. And that has resonated well so far.
Yeah, and also like when I read the book, I really liked the fact that you're giving the history and then the concepts and the methodology, let's say, and then you apply it with this fictional company. You even share the templates and you can use
Yeah,
it like this, and this workshop should be about this. So it's really also very hands-on, practical, almost a consultancy guide. Like how do you
yeah, yeah,
transform a company in this perspective? So really nice there. I'm really happy that it's doing well. Getting a
yeah.
feedback. Is there like a second edition coming out, or what are your future plans?
So I'm thinking of definitely. I'm working with Andres on thinking on two different things, right? One thing is we would like to make a lot more people read this, right? The reason it could be One of the things we are facing is, even though we know that a template is powerful, the approach is powerful, not many people have read it end to end to see how these things fit together, right? So one of the things we are going to work on is how to come up with some approach that can be made simple, if you will, as a starter pack, rather than spending a lot of time in going through the book, understanding the template, running that full workshop, this which could take few days in certain use cases. How to make it simple is one thing we are working on, and second thing is now AI, as I mentioned, has dramatically shifted the entire distributed operating model need, because the amount of processing power, the amount of data, and the amount of security and the compliance that is around the data, when it comes to preparation, when it comes to building and modeling a new LLM, as well as deploying it, there's so many different complexities that I've brought in. So one thing we would like to do is also add the AI perspective, especially the generative AI perspective, into the next edition if we get to work on it. So making it simple so that we can reach to more audience from the version one of the book or edition one of the book, and then extending it to the AI impact and the AI future are two things we are planning to work on.
Really nice. Yeah, because the more I think about it, and especially with the new announcement of OpenAI, the spring update, where you can see what the new ChatGPT 4.0, but then the it's crazy and amazing. And I'm sure that many organizations who were hesitant to use public cloud will now use it just for the Azure OpenAI, the secure edition. So the landscape will be impacted just by the driver called AI.
Yes, yes, yes.
Exactly.
And the availability of the and the availability and the cost of entry as well, right? So if the people want to build their own AI ecosystem, unless they have the mass or volume, when I say mass or volume, mass means one big application that is delivering their entire business value, that needs to be AI enabled, or multiple use cases or multiple applications that they can benefit from AI. They cannot see a TCO or ROI easily on that, right? So that becomes a easy way for them to adapt out of the box AI capabilities provided by cloud providers. However, there are still concerns around this API wall these cloud providers put in front of them. They don't know what data it is being trained on, what will happen to the data, what kind of compliance and regulatory requirements that they have to fulfill, and the simple hallucination impact and the assessment around it, whether it is going to be a decremental for the business value or the customer experience the enterprises have. There's so many open questions, but I do see eventually you are going to go into a multi-model ecosystem where most of the models will be based on open source ecosystem for building as well as inferencing the models, and it will be on the hybrid cloud ecosystem, so the customers have the choice to run it wherever they want.
That's a real nice second edition of the book. I can see it already happening. Looking forward to reading that one. So, Aylan, with that said, thank you very much for joining on this episode. If people have questions or they want to reach out to you, what is the best way to do that?
I think the easiest way is to find me in LinkedIn, right? As you mentioned, my name is a little bit difficult, but if they are able to find my name in LinkedIn, that's the best way to reach out. And I do have a Medium blog. I'm not very active now, but I've been working on some of my point of views on AI, especially generative AI future. And as I mentioned before, since there is a lot of push for enterprises to think of modernizing the applications to be more conversational, how do you combine the application modernization work stream along with the generative AI adoption for intelligent next generation conversational applications is something I'm focusing on as well. So I've been writing some Medium blogs as well. The easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn, or if you can find me on Medium, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have there as well.
Wonderful, and also share the links in the video down so everybody can see it. Ahilan, with that said, thank you very much for joining. It was great talking to you. Got lots of new insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jedro. Thank you for having me here, and looking forward to some of the questions from the field. And as I mentioned, any questions, any thoughts, any suggestions, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or in Medium. And see you all later. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Blue Dragon Podcast, a podcast dedicated to IT decision makers and helping them gain perspective of what's going on in cloud, AI, and security. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up, like and subscribe to the channel so you'll be up to date all the time when new episodes come out. Your support really means a lot to me. Thank you very much. Have a great day and see you next time.